Hello everyone, in this video I want to show you an experiment about preparing a salt using an acid and an insoluble base. The aim or goal of this experiment is to prove that salt can be formed by using an acid and an insoluble base, and to answer the questions about the experiment. Okay, so the materials needed for the experiments are a measuring cylinder, a dilute sulfuric acid, a beaker, a Bunsen burner, a tripod stand, wire gauze, spatula, copper oxide, glass rod, filter funnel, 2 pieces of filter paper, conical flask, and an evaporating dish. Okay, so the first step of the experiment is to warm 50 cm³ of dilute sulfuric acid in a beaker gently. Avoid to boil it. Then the next step is to use a spatula to add copper oxide a little at a time to the acid. Stir it constantly with a glass rod. Continue adding the copper oxide and stirring it until there is excess copper oxide in the beaker. So we're gonna answer the first question of the experiment. Why is there a need to add excess copper oxide? There's a need to add excess copper oxide because if there is excess copper oxide, it means that the dilute sulfuric acid already reacted. It already formed a reaction between the dilute sulfuric acid and the copper oxide. Okay, now we move to the next experiment. The next one is let the beaker cool down. Then remove the excess copper oxide by using a filter funnel and a piece of filter paper to filter the contents of the beaker. And then after that, we collect the filtrate in a conical flask. Okay, now we're gonna answer another question about the experiment. What is the color of the filtrate? So, if we observe the filtrate, we can see that the filtrate is black colored. This black colored filtrate is a copper sulfate solution. Okay, we move to the next step. The next step is we need to heat the filtrate gently. We need to heat the black colored filtrate gently in an evaporating dish to evaporate most of the water from the filtrate, so that a saturated salt solution is left in the evaporating dish. Then, if we already heat it up, allow the saturated salt solution to cool and crystallize. We can see in the evaporating dish that we have formed a salt crystal in a saturated salt solution. Then, we are going to dry the salt crystals on a piece of filter paper. Identify the salt crystals. Okay, so the salt crystals that are formed are copper sulfate crystals. Okay, so now we are going to write the word equation for this neutralization reaction. Okay, so the word equation for the experiment is sulfuric acid plus copper oxide result or form copper sulfate plus water. Sulfuric acid is the acid, the copper oxide is the base, copper sulfate or the product is the salt, and then water. Okay, so next we are going to answer the last question for the experiment. So the question is, what ions replace the hydrogen ions in the sulfuric acid in the reaction to form the salt? Okay, so in the previous step, there is a reaction to form the salt. So salt is a compound that is formed when one or more of the hydrogen ions of an acid is replaced by a metal ion or a copper ion. So what ions that replace the hydrogen ions in the sulfuric acid? The answer is when the copper sulfate solution reacts with sulfuric acid, the hydrogen in the sulfuric acid is replaced by the copper ions in the copper sulfate solution. And then, by the displacement reaction, it forms salt. So, the conclusion of the experiment is that we can form a salt by using an acid and an insoluble base. So, that's all for the video and the experiment. Thank you for listening.